In the 7.24 Reaper update, we have lots of new features, including changes to automation points. We can now resize them. Many changes to automation and to rendering and to the custom menu editor. Lots of stuff. Let's check it out. And we're going to start this one off with a bunch of rapid fire quality of life improvements. Ruler, add actions and ruler context menu entries to set or reset project start time or start measure. So let's say we want bar 11 to be the starting position of the project. So we could open up project settings and we go to this button here, change start time measure, click on it, set 0 to current edit cursor, and then hit OK. And now bar 11 is where the 0 position of the time counter is. Now, if we want to reset that, right click in the ruler area, then change start time measure. We can now set this to the edit cursor, reset project start time, set measure 1 to the nearest measure, or reset project start measure. So bar 11 set to measure 1, and we got negative numbers here. Go back to the very start, the left edge of the project, right click, change start time, reset project start measure. Let's reset that, and reset project start time. Let's reset that. You don't always have to go into project settings to do this anymore. You can now do it from the ruler context menu. And there's also actions, ruler reset project start measure, or start time, ruler reset project time. Transport, label show transport actions as transport, play, record, stop, in case the user doesn't know what a transport is. And so this is sort of like in response to Kenny's recent video on the transport bar. A lot of people will accidentally lose the transport bar, which is the play, stop, record buttons. For new users, they might accidentally hit the shortcut. But now in the view menu, you're going to see this as play, record, stop. And you're going to see this in the action list. If you're searching for play button or record, you will be able to find the transport bar. Instead of view, show transport, it's now toggle transport visible, play, record, stop. It's just for the users that have no concept of reels of tape. That's what the transport is, transporting the tape. It doesn't make sense in digital, but that's the term we use, and that's the term that's pretty much used in all DAWs. Play, record, stop button. Like, what would you call that? Batch converter improves support for converting video media items imported from a range. So I've got some video clips here in my timeline. I'm going to go up to the file menu, go to batch file item converter. I'm going to import these from the timeline, just like that, with the add button. And now I will convert these to 24-bit WAV files and be able to do things like normalize and things like that. So so it's just better support of grabbing the items from the timeline and then being able to process them. If they're stereo files, you can convert them to multi-mono. You can choose to keep them at whatever the source format is, changing sample rates, adding metadata. If you have a bunch of files that were exported along with video or the source recordings where you're not using the video, or if you just want to separate the audio track from the video file while also doing a bit of normalizing and brick wall limiting, I find this to be very convenient for when I'm recording with my phone, GoPro, anything like that. Click source. Double-click open source properties dialog. Add use project metronome samples frequencies to presets menu. Copy click samples when saving project with media. All right, so we go to the insert menu and then insert click source. And this basically creates a metronome item that can be stretched out as long as you want. And double-clicking on it will open up the source properties for this window instead of opening up the item properties, which is what it used to do. So double-click, you get all the settings for this item. You can change the metronome samples, you can change the volume, you can change the pattern, and all that stuff. You have the presets menu that is also in the new metronome thing that we will get to later. But yeah, just simply that you can double click it and get to those settings instead of having to right click source properties. It's a nice improvement. Timecode generator, double click, open source properties dialog. So same thing here. We're going to go to insert menu and then SMPTE LTC MTC timecode generator. And that puts in a timecode generator item. And double clicking will open the properties where we can change the format, timecode, all the various timecode settings, start offsets, things like that. So again, instead of opening up item properties as it was by default, we'll now open up source properties by default just for these specific types of items. Paste. Action to paste as new takes supports pasting files from Explorer, Finder, etc. So let's say we've got an item in the project and an item that we want to import into the project. Command C to copy. And if I come over to Reaper and edit take paste as takes in item, that will import that media file into this existing item in the timeline as a new take. And if they are different lengths, you can always drag that out to see the full length. Does it work with multiple items? Let's find out. So I hit copy, I'm gonna come in here. I'm gonna hit like shortcut for this, which I have on Control V. It's not gonna be Control V for you, but yeah, multiple takes. That's awesome. You can find that in the action list. Paste as takes and items. Envelopes. Add options in preferences appearance to control envelope point size scaling. So this is a really simple one, but I think this is a wonderful addition. If you ever thought that the envelope points are a little too small, you can now tweak that. That's here, envelope point size scaling. I currently have it at 1.5 with a non-selected points scaling of 0.75. Let's set this back to the default of 1. Let's set it to 1 as well for the default experience. So I won't zoom in further than this in editing, but I'll put in a point and I'll put in another point, and you can see this point is unselected, this point is selected, 2 points. I think the envelope point size scaling goes up to 9. Yeah, so there you go, there's 9. And if we want to not have the unselected points as big, you can do 0.5, for example. So this is a scale relative to the main envelope point scaling size. So yeah, I mean, obviously 9 is a very large number. 1.5, I feel like works really well, and 0.75 works well as the unselected point size. A lot of people have asked for being able to resize that. Any visually impaired users, even just slightly visually impaired, it's going to help. Anyone that's on a 4K screen and those envelope points are just even tiny, just a couple pixels, you can now resize them and make them much more easy to use. Lanes. MIDI export ignores lanes that are not playing back. Set last clicked lane copy paste destination when clicking empty space in lane header area. So I've got a track here with a couple fixed item lanes. And so the first new thing is that when there is MIDI on these different lanes, and if some of the lanes are not playing back, those inactive lanes, the MIDI on them, is not going to contribute to what goes into the export project MIDI. And the other new thing is related to the sort of paste target, this sort of notch here that you see around the edit cursor. So you can click on a track control panel, or you can click in the timeline, or you can actually click in this empty area here, and that will move your edit cursor and the target for pasting an item, like that. Copy or cut wherever you click. That chooses the target. But that didn't really happen with the fixed item lanes. So there are 3 lanes. So it's going to go to like the last touch, but you can also click in the header area. So that's this section here, and that will move it like that. So if I park my edit cursor here, and for some reason I didn't want to click into the timeline there, I could click on the lane header, and right beside just the empty space above or below the solo button, that will move the paste target. Automation. Add preference to control which envelope is recorded to when pre-effects and post-effects envelopes are both armed. Reset latches, if not in latch preview, when moving edit cursor while stopped or paused. Improve latch behavior of effects bypass automation. All right, so we're getting a little deeper into automation stuff here. So let's first look at the preferences. This is a new option here If both pre-effects and post-effects volume pan width envelopes armed, target both envelopes, pre-effects envelope, post-effects envelope. I'll keep this on both envelopes for now. And let's arm a couple envelopes here. Let's go to the volume pre-effects and the normal standard volume envelope. I'm going to set this to write mode. And so you can see here that both of these are armed for recording. And if I hit play and move my control surface, you can see that those are changing. I could also move the track volume control. And that's affecting both of those envelopes because they are both armed, right? Now, if I go into the preferences and set this to post-effects envelope, and I again go into write mode, I start here, I move the control surface, or I move the controller, or the actual UI element for the fader, the pre-effects volume envelope is not being written to. And we could flip it to the other one so that the pre-effects volume envelope gets written to. So there's now a preference that allows you to write to both at the same time, and it's just a matter of choosing which one is armed or not. So if I had this on both, again, write mode, disarm the pre-effects lane, and I start writing, only the one that is armed will be written to, and without stopping, I will arm the second one. And now pre-effects and post-effects volume envelopes are being written, and I can disable the post-effects, and just the pre-effects is written. You can kind of force it to always write to the pre-effects or always write to the post-effect envelope. It's sort of an override for if they're both armed. If you're more careful about which ones you're arming, then it probably doesn't make any difference. Reset latches if not in latch preview when moving edit cursor while stopped or paused. So we've got the volume envelope here, and I've got this track set to latch. If I am currently stopped, transport is not moving, and if I move the volume fader on my control surface, I can, set the volume here. If I can move the edit cursor over, the latch state has moved. And as I move the controller, it is setting that. And if I move again, it is no longer actively writing. For example, if I press play here, it's not writing any envelope points until I touch the fader. And then it's, then now it's actively writing. So latch state gets reset as you move the edit cursor until you touch something. Okay? It's a pretty subtle change, but I think it is important that parameters are not actively writing when you move the edit cursor to a new position. Now, the exception to this is in latch preview mode, where things can be actively writing, but nothing really gets committed until you actually, what's visible in the envelope lane right now is not the actual current position for the fader, and it won't be until I actually write something. So I want to write to this time position. I'm going to press the L key on my keyboard, and that's written that current position to there. And then, as you can see, this has not changed from actively writing, and I can make another time selection and another and another and another, and I'm writing that current fader position to the envelope lane. Just showing the difference here that touch and latch modes will unlatch automatically when you're stopped, but latch preview mode will not. So nothing has really changed with latch preview mode. Effects bypass automation has improved. All right, so I'm going to hit play, and then because we're in latch mode, whenever I click on something, it's going to start writing. So if I just do a single click on this bypass button, that has added the envelope, and it has started writing bypass automation to the project as the edit cursor moves. Right? I think that makes sense. And when I stop, it's reverted back to the original state. Now, if I am not moving, I'll hit that bypass button, and that writes all the way to the end of the project the bypass state. So it's now off. I can move my edit cursor and click this again, and now it's not bypassed. Kind of the main difference here is that sometimes it would take a double click to actually write that automation. So it's kind of a minor improvement, but really it's just working more intuitively, and it's just easier to write bypass automation. Metronome click source. Increase maximum click pattern length up to 72 beats. Restore 4x click multiplier. Support presets for click samples frequencies. Always show editable text version of click pattern. All right, so in a previous update, we got an overhaul of the metronome, which added this grid for setting the different metronome patterns. And with this, you can just click in here and create your pattern. And it was limited to the single and double speed, and now there's a 4x, which gives you a complete 16-step pattern per bar, which is pretty neat. In addition to that, we've got the 4 different samples that can be loaded, or frequency generators. Now in this update, we also have these sample presets. So you can set this the way that you like and then save a preset. So I'll just save this as my default, these are my default marimba samples. And then you can just load that here. So if I change this stick down and stick sub for A and B, what this actually sounds like is this. Okay, I will save this as sticks. Save preset, sticks. There you go. And we can switch back, default marimba, and that sounds like this. We have the option of setting the project to use the metronome grid. Toggle that right there. So setting these different click patterns, like the 2x, plays faster. And you can also set this to like triplets as well. It's very flexible in what you can do with the metronome now. Custom menu editor. Export menu name when writing .reaper menu file. Importing .reaper menu or .reaper menu set are now non-destructive, can cancel or apply changes. Importing .reaper menu allows importing from compatible contexts. Import menu name when importing Reaper menu into its original context, and improve behavior when drag and dropping Reaper menu set. Option menu, customize menus toolbars. Let's say we've got toolbar 13, and I want to export this. Current toolbar. I'll just export this to the desktop. And then when I go to another toolbar, let's say toolbar 14, I can import, and I can load that toolbar, and that will import, no problem, intuitively the way it should have all along, et cetera, et cetera. But before this update, if you exported toolbar 3, you could only import that into toolbar 3 unless you manually edited the text file to fix that. Not ideal, but finally fixed, and this is great. And in addition to this, it doesn't automatically save this. So until you hit apply, you can see that there's a little star here noting that this is unsaved and it can be canceled, it can be reset. And let's see what happens when you import by just drag and drop. It works super intuitively, just imports into this empty context. What happens if we import it into a menu that is already existing? It replaces it. I think that's fair. Not a way to merge them that way. But we can select multiple, we can copy, we can paste, so we can do all that kind of stuff. So a great addition to the custom menu toolbar editor. Normalize. Add preference for normalize actions to apply to all takes within a media item. Add setting to adjust mono media an additional -3 dB when normalizing media items, rendering, or converting. Change action descriptions to be clear about whether common gain is applied when using most recent settings. Consistent wording for all normalize actions and dropdowns. Support normalizing items separately to loudest item or as if they were one long item. So lots of nice new features for normalize. So these should be all the normalize actions, and they've either been adjusted or renamed, and then there's the additional like as if it's as one long item, item separately to loudest item. Let's just grab a selection of samples and I'll put them in on a single track. And we can try out some of these different options with the normalize function. Let's also spread these out like that and turn the grid off. All right, so first we need to set the actual settings here. So I'll run this. Normalize to, let's say, peak of -2. Okay. And then we have these options of normalize each item separately to loudest item as if it's one long item. Each item separately, so each item will be adjusted to -2, and you can kind of see in the file names +8, -0.94, etc. So undo that, and then I'll force these to be like as if it was one long item. Now, depending on if it's loudness normalization or just peak level, you may get different results with this item, with this option versus force normalize to loudest item. I think for peak normalization, it's going to be kind of the same. Let's set this to a short-term max of -30, and there's no mono items here, but we will normalize each item separately. Okay, and let's try the same item as if they were one long item, and that is indeed changing these, normalizing to the loudest item. I think that's going to be about the same, and then each item individually, clearly different settings. And then let's reset all of these to normal. These actions are available from the action list for when you're editing, but this should also apply to when you're rendering. Yeah, when you set this to something like select immediate items and then normalize here, we have these options to normalize to each file separately, to the loudest file, to one long file, or as the master mix. In the batch file converter, the normalize options don't show the full drop-down menu like we saw in the render window. Things are treated as if they're individual files. And I think that's to be expected. It'd be a little unexpected to treat all of these files, individual files, as if they're one file for normalization, but then export them separately. I think that's kind of weird. But yeah, let me know in the comments if that makes sense or not. Track groups. Support up to 128 groups. Do not show full list of empty groups. Limit to highest used named group plus 16. Group window shows bullet next to groups that are in use. I've got 3 tracks to go into a group. I'm going to right click and find the track grouping parameters. I do have a button on my main toolbar to do that, but that's how you would do that. Now this group drop down, this has been edited. It used to show 64 groups and then they added 128 with this update, but I begged them to reconsider the way that they were showing it because this was a mile long showing all 128 groups, even if they weren't used. I suggested several different ways, but this is what we end up with for this update. So we've got showing 16 different groups. If you click this, it will go down to the next set of, it will expand the list until you go back up to the top. Or if these are all named, you could jump to group 32 and then name that, and then that would show in the list as well. Somewhat optimizing, showing a massive amount of groups, focusing on the ones that are actually being used. So I will assign this to group 1. I will rename this guitars, and I will set this to my default, load default flags. There we go. All right, so now that this is a used group, you can see that this has a bullet point. This is another feature that I requested. Just makes it a lot smoother to see which ones are actually in use. So if I grab the 2 bass tracks here and then I open my group button, it will kind of default to group 1 here, but I can see that it's already used because there's that bullet point. So group 2, I'll load my default flags and then close that window. And then for my synth tracks, I will do the same thing. And then I can see here in this list, groups 1 and 2 are already in use. Even though I didn't rename group 2, I can see that it has been used because there is the little bullet point. So I can jump to, let's do group 16 for the synths. And then load default flags. And so I can see that since group 16 is in use, and 1 and 2 are also in use. So if you've got projects with like 1,000 tracks, you can now have 128 groups to organize that and make navigation and automation a lot easier. Render. Add button to run actual render to file after successful dry run render. Add right-click menu action to open render peaks dialog modally to allow focus to return to project. After adding to the render queue, update render queue window if it is open. Clicking render peaks display sets edit cursor in project. Display cursor at mouse position when mouse is within render peaks display. Display short-term loudness graph by default can be disabled in loudness/gain reduction tooltip. Display timeline ruler below render peaks display. Increase default size of render process dialog. Increased resolution of loudness statistics history. Launch file, show in folder, media explorer buttons respect the current selection in the rendered file list. Move actions to jump to loudness or first clipping sample to render peaks display right-click menu. Move options for completed render window closing behavior for render process window to render setup window. Right-click render peaks display to insert project marker or create project region. Show project markers regions in render display peaks. Show project markers regions in render peaks display. Support adding rendered files to project from render process window. Support changing render statistics display preferences from preferences audio rendering. Support changing render statistics preference from render dialog. Support creating time selection in render peaks display. On mouse up, the time selection is created in the project. Support hiding project markers and regions from HTML render statistics. Support render project markers regions in HTML render statistics. Support normalizing limiting to master when rendering selected media items using region, render matrix, or any render setup that does not involve processing everything through the master track. Support sorting render statistics list view. All right, so lots of changes for the render window, and we're going to start off in the preferences for rendering. I'm just going to make sure that close render windows is not turned on right now. In stats statistic display, we can do things like customizing the renders statistic charts. And if we want, we can enable hiding the project regions markers. I'm gonna have that unchecked for now. And then the preference for short-term or momentary loudness graph, it can be set here. And it can be overridden in the actual render window. All right, so in this project, I have a few markers, I have a few regions, and I'm going to render this. Those preferences I just showed can also be overridden here. And now I'll do a dry run render. So what's new in this render window is we see the markers and the regions, including the region colors and marker colors. We've got that momentary or short-term loudness graph. If we click in here, we can actually move the edit cursor. We can make time selections. We can right-click and then insert a project marker or insert region. This is pretty great new stuff. Set a region here and then look at this. And then that will create a new region here for the time selection. It did not update here, but it did update in the project. We can change this to a momentary loudness graph. We can set it to no loudness graph. There were no clips, but we can see that there's some gain reduction happening in this section. Right-click this option, reopen this window modelessly to allow focus to return to project. So this is a modal window, which means that this is like on top of everything. If I click, I get that Mac alert sound when I click off, when I click somewhere else. But we can just set this to modelessly. And now I can click in the project and I can click in this window and go back and forth. I can do things like setting time selections and fixing problems without actually closing this window. So this is the dry run render. And if I actually did want to render this without any changes, I can just click render one file. In this case, it gave me a warning that I had already rendered this file. But otherwise, it brings up the rendered file window so I can set the settings. All I would need to do is silently increment the file names to avoid overwriting, and I can render that. I can open up the most recent render stats, and in here we can enable or disable the project markers and regions. So that's it for changes for the render window, and that's it for changes for this entire update. And that's it for this video. If you missed any of the previous update videos, there will be a link to the playlist down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, follow me on Facebook and Twitter, support the Reaper blog, through Patreon, and visit reaper.blog for more tutorials.